How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the Morbid Moonlight 31 Days of Felissa Rose, which is me doing my bit to honour the career of the amazing Felissa Rose, kind of going through her films one by one and sharing my thoughts on them, just because I think that even though a lot of people are familiar with Felissa Rose as a horror icon, a lot of her films are quite obscure, weird little indie films, some good, some bad, but all pretty interesting to talk about. I think we've had a pretty poorish run lately, so this time round I was kind of desperate to get to something that was even halfway watchable, just because I was kind of starting to feel like I might be getting stuck in this kind of rut. The film we're going to be talking about today, though, is 2018's For Jennifer. Now, if you've been keeping track so far, you might think that this is a film that sounds very much like another Felissa Rose film, which was 2016's To Jennifer, and the thing is that you'd be right. The craziest thing is that not only is this actually a sequel to To Jennifer, it's even a sequel to another Jennifer film, which is 2017's From Jennifer, which means that, believe it or not, and to the best of my knowledge, as somebody that's quite into the whole kind of horror world, this is actually one of the best kept secret horror movie franchises out there. And one thing that you know that us horror fans love is a nice meaty little franchise. The title, For Jennifer, is actually a play on that, as in the number 4, as in Pokemon Forever. I don't desperately want to get into too much plot here for a couple of reasons, but let's just say that what we've got here is a new group of characters, the lead of which is another Jennifer, this time played by Tiffany Fest, who's an actress who's popped up in quite a few Felissa Rose films over the years. She is this horror movie blogger. Her friends all throw her a horror-themed party, and the morning after she finds that somebody's left her this very special present. And that present, of course, is a film, and the film turns out to be To Jennifer. There's also a special message with it that says that what she is watching is completely real, and after she has watched To Jennifer, our new Jennifer decides that, as a massive horror fan, that she herself wants to go out there and make a film, because how hard can it be, right? Along the way, as she and her kind of group of friends struggle with inspiration, things start to happen that suggest that the worlds of reality and the worlds of the Jennifer films might be a lot closer than our characters think. Now, that might sound like it's all a little bit too kind of postmodern, too clever for its own good, kind of too far up its own arse, but I think that apart from some issues that I've got with the last act, there's a very good chance that not only is this a film that breaks a run of, quite frankly, bad Felissa Rose films, but it might also be the best film that Felissa Rose has ever been involved with. And I'm going to tell you why this is just such an impressive piece of work. I think the thing that's worth mentioning at the very start is, and I think it probably will affect your own personal enjoyment of this film, and that's the fact that I really liked To Jennifer, and because For Jennifer builds a lot on that film, I think that if you really didn't care for To Jennifer, then there's a chance that this might not work on you, even though it does more or less stand up on its own. I think what's most impressive for me, though, is the way in which For Jennifer sets about weaving in the previous films in the series into this kind of intricate reality-bending tapestry that kind of manages to do clever things with the way that we actually relate to the films. If you remember when I was talking about To Jennifer, and I said that my biggest problem with found footage films was the fact that they never try to actually capture reality, but just try to capture the look of a found footage film, well, For Jennifer, without wanting to sound too ridiculously pretentious about this, manages to recapture some of that weird feeling of creating a reality that's got layers to it, that even though this is obviously just a film, it manages to make you feel like you're watching something that's been very cleverly crafted to give you those kind of stomach drop moments when very real things start happening to these characters that feel unsettling. I mean, we've all seen those films where the characters get a videotape and they think it's a snuff film, or that it might be real or whatever. The twist here is that the film that the characters are watching is To Jennifer, which we're already familiar with. To Jennifer was itself already a film that started off as a movie in a world where the first To Jennifer film was just a film, so that means we're stepping back another level from that to a reality where both Jennifer films are just movies, and then we're being asked what if they were actually real? If this sounds really artsy and pretentious, I can promise you it's not, because at the end of the day, it is a found footage film, and the characters are very simple and very realistic. It's just a clever premise that really does follow through with the basic central idea of, I suppose you could say, the franchise up until this point. The first To Jennifer film was the first film apparently ever shot entirely on an iPhone, and therefore the story goes, telling everyone who watches it that they too could make a film just using their phone if they want to. And the fact that all of the other 3 Jennifer films spin off from that basic idea, I think that's really cool, where you've got different people taking up the challenge of making a film using just their phones. Now, I agree with a lot of the kind of lamp-shaded criticisms of iPhone movie making that characters in this film say. You know, stuff like, just because you can make a movie on a phone doesn't mean that you should. The idea of, oh wow, isn't that amazing? That doesn't mean a thing to me. I'm not impressed by any of the Jennifer films because they're shot on phones. I'm impressed with them because they actually use that idea and think up ways to justify that by incorporating that kind of DIY horror movie enthusiasm into the actual films themselves. As I said when I was talking about To Jennifer, I think filmmaking is fascinating, and here, again, we get a chance to look at a group of friends trying to work out how to make their own film, and I think that's a fun story that gives these films a decent structure that a lot of found footage films kind of lack. But that idea ended up featuring quite a bit of fluff in To Jennifer, but this time around, things are a lot more focused. After the kind of opening party scene, which is just chaotic and ugly and terribly shakily filmed, there's a really nice straight-to-the-point approach to the story in For Jennifer, where our characters just hang out and try and get their film made, all whilst there's this unsettling, growing mystery in the background, as Jennifer 4.0 begins to find out things aren't necessarily what they seem. And I think it's great how kind of subtle and disturbing things are, not in that kind of shitty Paranormal Activity way, where you've got to really gear yourself up to be genuinely terrified by a cup falling off a table, but in a way that's impressive because it plays with a lot of different levels of reality, that rather than ever fooling you into thinking that you're actually watching something that's real, you just have to applaud the kind of intricacy of it all, and how carefully events are brought together, and how the central ethos of the found footage genre is used. Instead of making us believe this film is real, For Jennifer is the story of someone who's seen the same films as us, therefore putting her in our reality, realising that the films that she's seen, that we know to be just films, might actually be real. What I love so much about this idea is that it's the kind of really fascinating concept that you could only get away with in a franchise that's so obscure and little known because you can afford to take risks. Any proper big franchise is obviously fairly reluctant to shake things up or to try anything that's genuinely kind of original or interesting, just because there's so much at stake and you really have to be afraid of alienating the fans. With something like this, these Jennifer films that are through and through these kind of really totally indie films that can afford to be wild and experimental with what they do, the end result is that the franchise of films that builds up to this really hugely kind of ambitious film that's still really fun and light on its feet. But it's also at the same time very dense, very cleverly structured. It's that rare film that's both very much centred around the kind of core mythology of its previous installments, but at the same time is also something that you could show to somebody that hasn't seen any of the other films and it'll work either way. Sadly, I can't quite go into full details of some of my very favourite stuff in For Jennifer, but put it like this. There's moments of world building here, stuff that develops things from previous films that really did send shivers down my spine, as well as this truly chilling performance that I would love to talk about, but I think it'd probably ruin one of the film's biggest and best moments. We've also got, and I think that this might be the first time ever, unless we count Return to Sleepaway Camp, we've got Felissa Rose in a returning role, playing the same Jennifer character that she played in To Jennifer, this presumably struggling actress, who again turns up to audition for the part of Jennifer. The audition scenes this time around, maybe kind of in an effort to try and avoid just copying what had happened in To Jennifer, are kind of played more for laughs. We've got this kind of series of quirky characters and some kind of comedy music over it. And yeah, for a found footage film, To Jennifer has got quite a lot of music used in a lot of key moments that I know might bother some found footage purists who believe that the minute you start trying to bullshit and put stuff in that you wouldn't get if this was reality, you've missed the point. But at the end of the day, you've got to remember that this is a film that's presented to us in a fully edited fashion. So the fact that there's music on there, it seems legit enough. Plus, it's also pretty minimal, but it definitely does help to punch up the atmosphere when it crops up, especially in that brilliant scene that I was talking about earlier that I can't speak about because it might spoil something. But it's good to see Felissa Rose just doing her thing again, and it's more or less a direct reprise of her part from the second Jennifer film, even down to the fact that she throws a wobbly, and it's nice that she's committed enough to what I think was one of the best films that she's been involved with, that she was willing to come back for more. By no means is it a huge part, but I'm giving For Jennifer a Felissa factor of 2 out of 10, just because it's a very small part, but she does have fun with it, and that's important. Now, I could go on about how much I really love For Jennifer, because it is a very fascinating little indie film. However, because I imagine you're probably getting bored of that by now, I need to tell you that I do actually have problems with For Jennifer, and the biggest of those problems, annoyingly enough, comes down to the same thing as with 2 Jennifer, and that's the fact that the ending is a big, big disappointment. Not even really in the same way. I actually think that this ending, and I hate to say this, is even worse than 2 Jennifer's ending, for a couple of reasons. The problem is that the whole film builds up to this huge, disturbing mystery that seems to be leading to some great, terrifying finale. It gets to a certain point, and there's a lot of momentum that carries you forwards, but then you get to this certain point, and just when you're about to move into the third act, the whole film suddenly switches gear, and it enters into this area that's kind of very familiar to us, and it's just this really crude, basic, tedious way of ending things that throws out a few lines that kind of pay lip service to this being the point of the whole thing. But it feels like, and this is something that I've said before, that this is one of those films that really feels like it doesn't know how to end itself, and it just goes to this kind of default, bloody, messy, let's start killing people territory that seems such a slap in the face after how interesting everything has been up until this point. And it doesn't matter how self-aware the film tries to be about this, the end result is that you get 3/4 of a really interesting, intelligent film that just doesn't end properly or answer any of its own questions. Then it just dumps this kind of apologetic bloodbath in at the end and expects us to be satisfied by that. It's not even like 2 Jennifer, which did have a great ending, but then just ended up feeling the need to go for the cheap, ugly gore at the end. I'm really depressed by films that are great until you get to the point where you need to end things, and you suddenly realise that the filmmakers don't really know what to do to wrap things up. And that's a shame, because genuinely, up until the last 15 minutes or so, I probably would have been willing to give For Jennifer about an 8 out of 10. Genuinely, no word of a lie. That feeling of please don't fuck this up is starting to hit really hard for me now, and sadly, I think that this is the worst offender for dropping the ball, because it's such a shit climax. And I'm sorry to have to bring it up, but it's true, and knowing that the ending is a damp, very bloody squib means that it's hard to really say that I can absolutely recommend this film as a whole. However, I also can't deny that I really, really like a lot of the first 75% of this film, which is very interesting and very smart. Therefore, even though I suppose giving it a rating is fairly arbitrary because it's such a film of 2 halves, I think that I could, in all conscience, say that it's a 6.5 out of 10. One that I'm really glad that I saw, and I can honestly say that after watching Ugly Sweater Party, it really did restore my faith in a certain someone as being a tremendous actor. As disappointing as it is though, I think there's still an argument that this might be up there as being one of the best films that Felissa Rose has ever been involved with, and I stand by that. Which is something of a relief, definitely. We'll probably wrap things up here for today though, day number 17 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose. Hope you had fun, thanks for watching, and please, if you can consider throwing me just a bone of support for the channel, that would be magnificent. Thanks a lot, and we shall see you back here tomorrow for day number 18 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose. See you around, alright?